So let's talk a little bit about the bees and the hive. So as I mentioned before, the worker bee only lives 4 to 6 weeks. The workers are females. There is one female in the hive that is a fertile queen bee that produces all the children in the hive, and they're all her own. And she is laying 2,000 eggs a day throughout her lifetime, and she may live up to 4 years. But in the wild, when she hatches out and takes the mating flight, she will mate with drone bees, which are the male bees. So the male bees have neither mouth parts or stingers. They totally must be taken care of by the females. So despite the bee movie that you've probably seen with all the pollen jocks, I'm sorry, it's all ladies, it's a completely female-dominated society. So the males are there for producing the queen, allowing the queen to lay eggs and fertile eggs, which become worker bees. And in the fall, as honey production and it's time for the bees to be a little more saving and everything, they just kick those drones right out. That's it. And that's all the drones that are left. Any that have mated with the queen are dead. So it's a rather brutal society for us guys. But then again, you think the queen is she is the monarch of the whole hive, and all the bees are her children. However, she'll start producing more drone eggs, which are in fact zygotes. The males only carry the genetic information of the queen bee, and that's how she sends out her genetics imprint into the world. However, when she stops laying fertilized eggs, she'll start laying a lot of drone eggs, or she won't lay a good pattern or something. Other bees in the hive, little workers that have just hatched out, sense this, and they will start giving off a substance from a gland near their brain called royal jelly. And they'll feed this substance to maybe 6 or 7 or a half a dozen, maybe 10 newly hatched larvae within the hive, and they'll create a little cell that looks kind of like a peanut full of royal jelly, and this larva will feed on royal jelly and go from being a worker bee that lives 4 weeks, has a barbed stinger so it dies when it's stinging, to a fertile queen bee who has a round stinger and can live up to 4 years. So it's an amazing thing. The reason she has a round stinger is that when she hatches out, she will go and try to kill all the other queen bee cells in the hive, or any that have hatched out, or drive them away. And the old queen often gets driven away with a bunch of the bees that are still following her. Which brings up another thing. You see this little thing here? This is a Langstroth hive. In the 1830s, this is just a small scale version of it, but in the old days, let's go way back to when cavemen saw honey and honeycombs up in trees, and they go down up and chase the bees away and grab all that honeycomb, to the point where they would drop those combs into a log or a basket. This is a basket, or an old world basket, and the name for that is skep. This is a skep. And we did a lot in the South. We would do just logs. But the problem was that whenever we wanted to get the honey, we had to chase them all away, destroy the hive, and get all the honey out of there. So in the 1830s, Dr. Langstroth observed in nature that all the combs in the hive were about 3/8 of an inch apart. And with that idea, he created this hive where the frames were 3/8 of an inch apart. That allowed us, with these sections, to take out the honey, extract the honey, put the combs back in, and the bees would repair the combs, fill them up with honey again. We had a completely reusable sort of system. We'd usually have the hive body, where the queen would lay her eggs. They'll put a screen on top of that, And then we'll put these supers on top of that, and we could make honey, and we wouldn't have to just destroy the hive, and it's all great. Well, today there's a whole great group of beekeepers who believe that the invention of the Langstroth hive was the beginning of end for bees, because it really allowed us to mechanize the process, to domesticate the process, to put the bees in our service instead. And so there's a whole group of radical beekeepers out there today that are into top bar hives, which is essentially where they're just doing a box and they're putting a sticks on the top and letting them make their concentric combs there. And there's another one called the Wari hive. It's all about the bees, and it's not so much about honey. You can get a little honey out of there, but it's all about the bees. So one thing that all this bad stuff, and I've got more bad stuff to tell you, has created is this a wonderful awareness that people have on bees and how they want to save them and do other things to help them. When I talk about a couple other bad things, and I told you about neonics, we've also got this little pest called the varroa mite, and varroa is causing tremendous problems. Varroa came from Eastern Europe, I guess originated there, or somewhere in Central Asia, many, many years ago, and some of the bees there are kind of resistant to it. But it is, imagine if you had a basketball-sized bug on your neck sucking your spinal fluid. That's what a varroa mite is like. They're the most nasty pest of bees, and they've spread tremendously. They came here maybe 30 years ago, and for a while Hawaii did not have them, New Zealand did not have them, islands did not have. Now they're pretty much everywhere else around the world. It's hard to get a varroa. And we've all, as beekeepers, have noticed much bigger varroa losses in the last few years. It's something commercial beekeepers like Jesse always have to contend with. And one good thing is there's some new research going on. I don't know if the heated chambers for varroa and things like that. We're trying to do this as pesticide-free as possible. But it's killing a lot of hives. Then we've got this other cute little bug called the small hive beetle, and that came in from South Africa a few years ago. And that is an amazing pest in that it mimics the scent of a bee, so the bees don't realize they're in there until it's too late. And they lay their eggs within the brood, and their larva eats the bee larva, and in 2 weeks can turn your hive into a mass of slime, and it is very gross. But this was a pest of fruits and melon crops in South Africa, but it's become a major pest of bees here in the South. And there's a few little organic ways to try to take care of them, but you've got to keep your hive strong. If your hive is strong, they're going to be defensive and as much as they can, and prevent too many losses from the small hive beetle. So, I want to tell you about what you can do to help us out today, but a few other things here. This is beeswax. If you'd like to pass this around, would you like to pass that around? That is beeswax. Does anyone know what beeswax is? Beeswax is bee fat. So bees have exoskeletons. They can't get any bigger. So when they eat too much honey, they give off scales of wax and it's beeswax. I've always thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could make our own homes just by overeating? It would really solve a lot of problems. But the bees will start excreting beeswax scales. They'll turn it into honeycombs. Here's a little tray of honeycomb. And then we'll melt it down. Of course, beeswax is great for a variety of things. It's extremely hard. Doesn't it smell good? It just has the best smell. But it's very hard. Artists use it for encaustic, different things, and batik. But it's many more uses. It's got industrial uses also. Here's a quick tip. Honeycomb. Can you chew it? Can you eat it? Yes, you can. And it's honey in its most raw form. our company used to be the largest packer of honeycomb in the United States. And in the South, you would always take a piece of honeycomb and chew it up and then spit it, like chewing gum, and then spit it out. But honeycomb tends to be really popular in countries that have a tradition of honey and bees. And so wherever honey is popular, they really love honeycomb as sort of a symbol of purity. We sold our honey for years to both Israel and the Middle Eastern countries, and I've always thought that they have deep religious significance. You've heard of Rosh Hashanah, even Ramadan, which started today. At the end of the Ramadan feast, they'll always feature honey, and it's a big time for honey in the Mideast. They have shelves of honey, just like a bread aisle, except it'll be a honey aisle in the Mideast because they value honey so much. So I've always thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if the world could get along over its love of honey? Anywhere in the world that has discovered honey, it has been embraced and almost considered sacred in many, many different cultures. The honeybee hive is a superorganism. Here you have all the bees are working together. You have 60,000 bees in a hive, all working for the same cause. When they hatch out, they immediately know what they've got to do. They stay within the hive, and they do hive cleaning. They lead that queen around, and they do things within the hive. And in the last 2 weeks, only in the last 2 weeks of their life, do they go out and forage for honey and nectar and pollen to bring back. And you'll notice at the entrance of the hives are there, the bees are there at the entrance of the hives, and they're giving off their pollen and their nectar to other bees, and they're actually spitting into the other bee, which will take it to a cell, put that nectar in the combs, fan it so it loses its moisture, and once it gets below like 19% in moisture, cap it off, and it will be nature's most perfect food. People ask me, minimum shelf life, 3,000 years. It is truly an amazing, amazing substance. It is nature's most perfect food. If it has too much moisture, which mangrove sometimes has, because it's produced in the wetness of our summer, it will quickly become mankind's first alcoholic beverage, which is mead. So that's how, see what honey and bees have done for us? Mangrove's a really cool honey historically here. In New Smyrna, you go to the 1890s and the records that are here, there was tremendous amounts of saw palmetto and mangrove honey being shipped out of here to Europe. It was a big money producer. In fact, we made record amounts of mangrove honey. But it tended to be cooked quite a bit to get the moisture out. Today, you need a beekeeper like Jesse who's going to carefully dry the honey out a little bit before it's put in the bottle. So we don't want to cook honey today. We realize that detracts from its all. But mangrove, historically, for this area, was a big, big income producer. So it's an amazing thing, and we're just getting it now again that it's come back after the freezes.